And story means the universe is going somewhere, and it's going towards more and more value, more and more love. And love is real, and love is a real value, right? And value evolves. And some values are 1,000 times better than other values, right? That's a big deal, right? And we're actually, our value is not ethnocentric, homophobic, mythic Russia. Our value is goodness, truth, and beauty. And those things mean something. So when the West starts to stand for value, when we're energized by value, now, what do we need to do in order to do that? We need to actually articulate very clearly, right? And the best way we can, and put all of our passion, money, time, and energy into articulating at a level of Kant. It's like a Kantian revolution. What is the universal grammar of value? And this is an incredibly, incredibly important week, right? For us to be together, to talk in the deepest way we can, and to love in the deepest way we can, right? In response to this moment in the world, this moment in Ukraine, this moment in which we are all quite literally Ukrainians. And I want to talk about what that means. And I'm going to go slow today, friends. I'm going to go slow. We're going to see some clips. You know, I spend a good part of the last night just trying to read, some 40, 50 articles, right? Just get a sense of the conversation. And there's lots of really, really important conversation and important voices out there, and I want to honor them all. And yet the conversation paradoxically and tragically doesn't address what we need to address in order to heal this, to heal the fracture, in order to not only respond today, but respond to the inevitable tomorrows, right? In order to know, for example, and I want to frame it really clearly, how do we respond, right, to a nuclear power, right, to a nuclear superpower, which is not an economic superpower, not a cultural superpower, but a nuclear superpower, which invades a sovereign state for a set of, what are obviously debased interests. And we'll talk about what those interests are. But how do we respond? And this is a tragic moment. Just feel the tragedy of this moment. On the one hand, Ukraine is being beyond heroic, and we'll talk about that, in 1,000 different ways. And at the same time, we're not actually putting a peacekeeping force on the ground. We're not putting boots on the ground. We're not creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine because we're afraid that will give Putin the justification to engage in a nuclear strike, a tactical nuclear strike, right? The nuclear backpacks. So the result will be a mushroom cloud, right? So we're sitting here. We don't know whether Zelensky, this beautiful man, his parents, right, his family, not his parents, part of his family was killed in the Holocaust, right? A comedian, right? A man of laughter, right? A man of dance, right? In the Eurovision, right? Who is, saying to the American Congress, hey, I don't need a ride, when they offered to airlift him out, I need ammunition. And he's staying there. We don't know whether he'll be alive today or tomorrow, and he doesn't know. And so we're witnessing a kind of vast heroism. But what's that heroism about? We need to understand. And we need to understand why it's so important. And we need to understand how we can, in this world, be able to confront the Putins of the world and not stand by. How do we not stand by? What we're actually doing today, I want everyone to get the full tragedy of this situation. We're literally watching this happen. Yes, we've stepped in and we've imposed, in essence, the impact of a neutron bomb we've dropped in the Russian economy. And in how we've done that and why we've done that, we're going to talk about it. It's incredibly important. And yes, we're taking in refugees. And yes, we're trying to do everything we can to hand the Ukrainians weapons in every way we can. But we're stopping short of what would need to be done, right, to actually defeat Russia. We're doing that intentionally because we don't want to provoke a nuclear confrontation, which on a tactical level could happen anyways. But we're pretty much unilaterally, we all agree that we shouldn't step over that line. And so therefore we're helpless. So why? Right? How do we get here? What do we need to do? What needs to be done here? Right? And I want to try and work this through with you in a very deep level. We're going to take our time and try and understand what's actually happening here. Okay? So let's just start with David. Right? Welcome everyone. And let's do this for the sake of the evolution of love. Let's do this in order to actually articulate, right, a vision that will allow us to actually change the direction of the future. Okay? This is a big day. So I'm turning to David. David, read us the code, brother.
This week's evolutionary love code. Clearly, the values and story articulated by Putin in the public space today are akin to the values of Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. Today, the overwhelming value is to love by opposing Putin and China and supporting Ukraine and the Ukrainians in every way possible, but that will not take us home. The only effective response of the West to nuclear dictators is to tell a better story of value rooted in first values and first principles. To date, not only has the West failed to do so, but it has done the exact opposite. And precisely the voices today at the forefront of the liberal world who are crying out correctly and beautifully in the name of value against Putin are those who have made their postmodern life work, the deconstruction of all intrinsic value in the cosmos. Today must open the path to tomorrow, in which we reclaim value as real and articulate together with our Ukrainian, Chinese, and Russian brothers and sisters a shared story of evolving first principles and first values rooted in a shared story of value. I turn my word back to you, beloved Dr. Mark.
So what I want to do here is, and again, pardon me if today we're going to be a little bit different than we usually are. We're just going to gently find our way through. We're going to go step by step, and I'm going to kind of look things up with you, and we're going to have more of a fireside chat with our hearts ripped open and try and actually participate right directly in the evolution of value and the evolution of love in a way that responds directly and clearly right to this moment. So let's begin and I just want to feel for a second with you. If we can just feel together, let's just look at a couple of clips, okay? So David, if we can, put up, the first clip, there's a clip that the New York Times showed, which is a 53-second clip. It's this woman, right? An incredible clip. Let's just take a look at it.
I just want to live in our country. That's all.
Well, you're fighting for it. Very brave.
Can I switch with you for 1 minute?
Do you know how to use the gun?
No, a little bit. We started to teach 2 days ago. It's not awful.
Wow.
It's awful.
Are you scared?
Of course.
Right, so let's just ignore, the reporter who didn't do too well, right? You're very brave. Thank you, reporter. Thank you, Western media. And are you scared? Thanks for those questions. So mad blessings to the reporter, but just, oh my God, can you just everyone see her face? That's the face. Okay, that's the face of Ukraine right there. Okay? Now, this is real. Right? And she says, I just want to live in my home. Let's look at another clip. Let's look at the, I just want to before we talk, let's just feel for a second. There's this strange little moment, the second clip, David, of a person blocking, right? A person just walking up and trying to block a Russian military vehicle, right? It's kind of a tank man. This went viral.
фото. Все, не снимай.
Вася, не снимай!
Пойду не отхуяли, да.
Да все! Убери!
Аня, камеру убери на.
Нет!
Right, does everyone catch it? So just catch two things. Okay, so one is, right, this has gone viral. This is, they're calling it Ukrainian tank man. Right, this man just runs out in front. But just again, notice two things, and we're gonna unpack this right as we go. What does the driver of the Russian truck do? So here's this man trying to stop with his body, right? The advance, right, of the Russian convoy that's now heading into Kiev and many other places in the country. And of course, the driver of the Russian vehicle is not evil. He doesn't even know what he's doing there, right? He's either the victim of an incredible disinformation campaign, but he believes in life also, and he values life also. He swerves. Did everyone catch the swerve? And no one commented on the swerve. Does everyone get that? No one's commented on the swerve. But that swerve is our shared humanity. That swerve is our shared value of life. Let's look at the third clip, David, number 3. And this is just a moment of people fleeing in Irpin, right? And it's just to feel it. Well, let's feel and think into this. And again, I want to go super, super slowly, and step at a time. So 1, what does Putin want? And I'm gonna read you from a set of articles. Who is Putin here? Right? Who is the West? Okay? And what's actually at play here? So what we said in our code was, and we will put the code, in the center of the chat box. And I want to be careful here. I want to be slow here. I want to be humble here and audacious with you. What we said in our code was that, right, the only effective, right? Let me see if we can get the whole code there. Right, clearly the values in its story articulated by Putin in the public space are akin to the values of Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. So I want to start there. First off, is that true? Okay, and that's very, very important to understand. I got a number of texts from people, within, many of the communities that I'm associated with, and the text said something like, I'll read you one of them. All right, the text said something like, responding to the fact that we said, in our email, we're all Ukrainians, right? So this person writes, right, what about Yemen and Panama and Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and many more states America and Britain have invaded? So obviously the person's not tracking politics well, right? For example, Syria wasn't invaded by the United States, right? But it's part of, right, a deeper thing happening. And it's why are we getting upset about Ukraine, right? Isn't it true that America has engaged in realpolitik? And America has engaged in realpolitik in, any number of ways. America has, interfered with elections, and America has sought to topple, right, certain governments in the world, right, during the Cold War in the last 50, 60 years. Right? That's absolutely true. Right? And the greatest tragedy we could do now, which tragically the liberal world has been doing in its decline for the last 40, 50 years, right, is to make a moral equivalence between the West and the kind of China-Russia axis. And that's a very, very important thing to say, right? We can't engage in moral equivalence. That's actually not true. Has the West made X amount of mistakes? Yes. Is the West, wildly imperfect? Yes. Right? Is some of Putin's critique of the West correct? Putin has a keen sense, not only has a sense of, he's actually helped foment in the West division and polarization and collapse. And he has a keen sense of the danger, for example, of high tech. He has a keen sense of the collapse of value in the West. He's got a keen sense of the kind of narcissistic self-engagement, right, of the West. And he speaks all those things. And in fact, I have here actually a Twitter thread that the Russian government took down where Russia talks in, great depth about, the collapses of the West with some degree of accuracy. Nonetheless, the West is standing on a vision of value. And that vision of value includes universal human rights. That vision of value includes democracy. That vision of value includes the right to a fair trial. That vision of value includes proper information gathering and analysis of evidence in order to create fairness in the structure of society. Right? That vision of value includes, and that this is unbelievably important, right? So to make a moral equivalence, right, between, and for example, Glenn Greenwald, right, did this extensively. Look up Glenn Greenwald on the Ukraine, and he did an entire analysis essentially comparing NATO and Putin and essentially saying same thing. Wow, that's kind of a big deal, right? Russell Brand, right, who has a very popular podcast, right? Russell Brand says there's no goodies and baddies here. Russell, you got to work on your language. He says there's only baddies and baddies. Wow. Right, so Glenn Greenwald, right, and Russell Brand, I have another article here by Jim Garrison, right, who's an integral figure and the head of Ubiquity University. And Jim essentially writes a long article which he says the same thing. And I'll just give you a sense of it, see if I can find it here. Right, so Jim, who's, super intelligent, figure, right, says, to really understand what's happening here, take in the eastward expansion of NATO into Ukraine and what that means to Russia. Right? To really get that, remember back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviet Union attempted to send nuclear missiles to Cuba 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The US came within a hair's breadth of going to a nuclear war over this. Imagine if the Russians came into Canada or Mexico. The US would become apoplectic with anxiety and almost certainly go to war. Russia is no different. That's why there's been an aura of inevitability around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian bear feels cornered and is biting back. This is at the heart of why Putin has invaded. As the leader of Russia, he feels a sacred trust to protect the motherland. Right? Did everyone catch that? Let me see if we can get, just to get a sense of this. David, let's take a look at the chart of NATO. Right, I'll tell you which ones. We'll take a look at them together. Let's look at two things here, okay? All right, one, David, let's put up first the Nato Map 1, which is number 5, okay? Let's put up the NATO Map 1 so people actually get a sense of what this really means and what Garrison just wrote. So if you look at this map right here, what you'll see is 1949 is the black. Now Europe is kind of, when you're looking at your screen, Europe's on the left. Right, so 1949 is how much, right, of Europe was actually part of NATO. So the black, it's kind of very small. Russia is all the way on the right of your screen. So basically what this is basically saying is that slowly, right, 1952 to 1982, there's more and more blue. So it's moving eastward towards Russia, right? 1999, right, a different color, more and more moving towards Russia. 2004 to 2009, 2017 to 2020. And then in yellow is the different states that actually want to join, right? The places that want to join NATO. So the basic argument that's been made in, 15 articles I read, and Jim Garrison just made a version of it, is that the United States would do the same thing, right? The United States is also imperialist, is also about its own hegemony, right? Is also about its own power, right? In the Cuban Missile Crisis, we came within a hair's breadth of war. Glenn Greenwald makes the analogy. Russell Brand makes the analogy. Again, Brand says, there's no goodies and baddies here. There's only baddies and baddies. That's an incredible sentence, right? Coming out of the UK, with millions of people, right, following, right, that particular line. Jim Garrison, head of Ubiquity University, says the same thing, right? Another article here, the Ron Paul Institute, Libertarian Institute, right, says the same thing, right? Says this is all, an hegemonic attempt by America to kill the Nord Stream pipeline from Germany to Russia, to prevent any kind of German-Russian coming together. Right, and America is therefore, right, concocting, right, this scenario in order to paint Putin as a madman, right, to compare him to Hitler, when in fact this is a classical superpower war, right, with America and Russia being, or the West and Russia being, essentially, as Russell Brand said, baddies and baddies. Right, and the description here is, right, is in this chart, for example, how NATO expanded eastwards. Okay, so NATO expands eastwards, and because NATO is expanding eastwards, it's coming to the border of Russia, right? And NATO obviously has nuclear weapons, so Russia feels, right, terribly threatened. And, what is Putin doing, right? He is defending the motherland. He's the bear that's been poked. He's doing exactly what the West would have done. And that's a very strong argument that's being made in quite a lot of places. Let's take a look at the next chart so you can just see it a little more clearly. Take a look at the next chart with me. The very next one, David, if you got it. Thanks, brother. Okay, you can see it even a little more clearly here. You see Russia on the right, and you see Europe, right, on the left. And then you see this movement. You see Ukraine and Belarus right next to Russia. So there's this movement eastward. And by the way, this movement eastward, and there's a long step, STEPPE, which are kind of grassy plains that are very, very wide and very, very long that run across Russia's border, that in the winter, when the land is hard, are very, very easy to cross. And so, for example, right, another writer writes, kind of explaining, right, Hansi, right, who's a geopolitical writer, he writes, much ink has been spilled to gauge the sanity or insanity of the autocratic Russian president, right? However, he says, if you look at some of the more astute analysis out there, it becomes clear, right, that Russian leadership are in a long-term decline and may feel that their hand is forced in the matter. Why? Because if Ukraine joins NATO and the EU, right, the European Union with more than 40 million people switching sides, Russia's no longer going to be a geopolitical powerhouse. If Russia could reverse that and add the former Soviet republics, Russia could double its population. And if they could submit the biggest of these, namely Ukraine, to Russian rule, the likelihood of the remaining ones following suit would be that much greater. Keep going, right? Geopolitically, because of the large steppe, right, the grassy plains that stretch from northern Europe and widens towards the Ural Mountains, Russia becomes harder to defend from Western attacks. The farther its zone of military control is pushed eastward. That's what we're seeing here, right? On the chart in front of you, right? NATO is going eastward, closer and closer to Russia, right? It stands to reason and viscerally feel, okay, let's kind of feel this, right? Right, that Russia is threatened, right? And Ukraine joining NATO would more or less leave Russia at the West's mercy. So as long as Ukraine is not under Russian control, Russia loses also income as it has to pay tariffs on gas pipes passing through the country. Ukraine has found its own gas deposits and could soon be a real competitor to Russia's main income. And if all of a sudden there would be a democratic alternative to Russia's gas, right, the West would be likely to trade with the former. Ukraine controls the water flow through a canal that goes down the Russia-controlled Crimea. And this region is so dry that its 2.5 million inhabitants are currently a big economic drain on Russia. Taken together, the Russian leadership's days are numbered if they do not seize control over the Ukraine. Okay? So in other words, this kind of argument, this is not the conclusion of this writer, but this kind of argument in various forms, right, is being made, right, in multiple publications. Let's see each other again. Let's lose that map. Okay? So this is categorically not true. Right? That is moral equivalence. The fact is, right, while the West is flawed, the West is standing for a structure of value, right, of an entirely different nature than that of Russia. And that's critical to understand. If you don't actually get levels of consciousness, you can't have a conversation, right? And in terms of structure stages, in terms of levels of consciousness, right, the West is standing, at least in principle, right, for universal human rights, right, for the right of Russell Brand, right, and Glenn Greenwald to write those critiques, right? If they wrote those critiques, right, in Putin's Russia, wouldn't go very well, right? The possibility of a free country, right, is a major, massive value, right? We're talking about, and the kind of moral equivalence between these two is utterly tragic, and it's one of the roots of the issue. So the first root of the issue is, I want to get this clear, right, is there's a collapse of story and value. And there's a collapse of story and value in the West. And Putin understands that, and China understood that. And so Putin and China, right, thought, right, and China's of course tacitly backing, right, this play very strongly. Putin and China, right, are completely committed to reverse U.S. hegemony, right? And U.S. hegemony is linked to the U.S. dollar. And there's an entire movement by China, right, to actually de-link international trade with the U.S. dollar, right? The U.S. dollar and its hegemony is directly connected with America's ability to maintain its military power, its 850 military bases around the world, and therefore to actually, right, retain and maintain a world that's not fundamentally authoritarian, right, in the most horrific of ways. That's a big deal. Now, the reason, I'm going to try and go slow now, I want to get some context. The reason Putin and China thought that this is a worthy moment to attack, they knew there would be sanctions, and they took that into account, is because they basically felt the West has lost its way. The West is not standing for anything. The West is not standing for any larger vision, for any larger sense of honor, for any larger sense. That's what they felt. Now, they got that half right and half massively wrong. Okay? So that's one. We're going to see that in a second. But number two, right? The first evidence, right? Paradoxically, the paradoxical evidence for Putin and China's position, right, is precisely Russell Brand's, right, take and Glenn Greenwald's take and the way Jim Garrison expressed it, right, is this notion that the entire thing is about realpolitik. The entire story is about power, which is the postmodern argument. That's what Foucault said. It's all about power. So it's American, right, Pax Americana imperialist power, right, against Russian power or an occasional Eurasian, right, alliance of power or a Russia-China alliance for a period of time. But the entire issue is power. That's not true. That's not true. The issue is power is, of course, at play. But actually, right, the West is standing for something. And paradoxically, what Putin reminded the West is of what they're standing for. Putin actually reminded the liberal West that actually we're standing for a set of values and that these values are real. And there's actually not moral equivalence between the Putin position, right, and the West's position. And here's the thing, this is a very, very, very hard thing to say, right, into, right, the ears of a world, right, a liberal world that's in a postmodern world that's devalued value, but actually the West's values are better right, exponentially than the values expressed by Putin and by Xi in China, which are totalitarian values which deface the divine and which deface goodness and truth and beauty. And we've got to get that. And I want to just read you a couple of things here to try and get a sense of this together. Okay? I'm just going to read you a couple of things. So, first thing I want to read you is, a Romanian paper, and I'm just looking at my notes here because I want to move through a couple of things. A Romanian paper writes, right, Joseph Adolf Putin, right, comparing Putin, right, to Hitler. Timothy Snyder writes a book, The Road to Unfreedom, where he documents, right, the structural analogy between Putin and Hitler, right, on multiple levels, right, calling Putin the Hitler of the 21st century. And what is Putin trying to do? Putin feels aggrieved, offended in a fundamental way, right, at the fall of power in the Soviet Union, right? And Putin's vision is to reconstitute, right, the Russian Empire, right? But I want you to actually hear directly, I'm going to quote from Putin directly. Putin, right, this is how he announces the war in the Ukraine. He says, what's the explanation for this contemptuous and disdainful attitude to our interests and absolutely legitimate demands? The answer is simple, says Putin. Everything is clear and obvious. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union grew weaker and subsequently broke apart. That experience should serve as a good lesson for us because it has shown us that the paralysis of power and will is the first step towards complete degradation and oblivion. We lost confidence for only one moment, but it was enough to disrupt the balance of forces in the world. So for Putin, this is in fact purely an issue of realpolitik, purely an issue of power. But that's not enough. His vision of power, he actually roots in a particular degraded vision of value. What's his degraded vision of value? So here's what he says. I'm going to keep quoting Putin. We're going to quote Putin today. He says, the problem is that in territories adjacent to Russia, which I note is our historical land, says Putin, a hostile anti-Russia is taking shape. Fully controlled from the outside, it is doing everything to attract NATO, armed forces, right, and obtain cutting-edge weapons. But what is this anti-Russia that he's talking about? The anti-Russia is Ukraine trying to be a Western democracy with human rights, right, with free flow of information, right, with basic human dignities and non-authoritarian state, right, with fundamental structures of fairness, right, in the courts, right? In other words, all of the values, right, of the West, right, which have to do with the dignity of all human beings who are not related to a particular color or creed or race, right, which are the fundamental bedrock structure of the West, right, and an essential inherent fairness and integrity in the way judgments work, right, and a distribution of authority, right, and all of these possibilities, right, are actually what he's calling anti-Russia. Right, this is an anti-Russia, a free, open, tolerant country, right, is for Putin anti-Russia. And Putin says, he says it very clearly, he says, for the United States and its allies, it's a policy of containing Russia with obvious geopolitical dividends. So for him, the United States is just engaging in power. It's got nothing to do with value. For our country, he says, it's a matter of life and death, a matter of our historical future as a nation. So what is Putin saying? What is this life and death? So clearly Putin is directly invested in this power struggle. And he projects that the United States is also in this power struggle, and it's power against power. But it's not. It's values against values. So let's understand exactly where Putin's coming from. So Putin, right, is deeply influenced by an ethnographer named Lev Gumilev, right, who's, right, and Alexander Dugin, and an entire school, right, of Russian Christian nationalists who write as follows. They talk about the biocosmic inner energy of every nation, and they call particularly, right, the inner energy, right, that animates, right, the unique Russian people, they call it the Passionarnost, the Passionarnost. And Putin says, I believe in Passionarnost. He says, in nature as in society, there's development, climax, and decline. The Russian people have an infinite genetic code, right? A unique biocosmic inner energy. Russia has not yet attained its highest point. We are on our way. Russia carries the power and potential of a young people. And the West, right, by contrast, is inferior and in decline, and it's time to strike. So essentially, what Putin is talking about, right, is not just a political conflict, but this is a fundamental struggle in which, and let's try and get this here, right, in which the West is inferior and there's a biocosmic, right, superiority, right, to Russia. And this is Russia's moment, and the intrinsic biocosmic, right, Russian people and the reconstitution of the great Russian, right, mother empire, right, is that destiny and history. Now, I want to get this here for a second, okay? I want to get this here for a second. So we've got Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald, right, and Jim Garrison, right, and, you know, the Ron Paul Institute, and I would say I've read a couple of dozen articles, right, of different forms that are basically making a moral equivalence between essentially the West and Putin. But Putin is not making that mistake. Putin actually is saying the flip opposite. He's saying, actually, the exalted, biocosmic, right, superior, right, Russian destiny needs to triumph here. We've been insulted, we've been aggrieved, we need to triumph, and triumph means we assassinate our enemies, we poison our enemies, we imprison people, right? We run Russia, right, with a small inner group of oligarchs, right? And we actually impose authoritarian rule of the most vicious kind, right? For Putin, that means that we unleash, for example, in Syria on its civilian population, right, chemical weapons, right? We unleash cluster bombs on civilians, right? We have no value, right, literally whatsoever for human life. Human life matters to Putin, not one iota, right? And the amount of Russian lost human life, the amount of suffering, right, you know, bombing civilians, right? None of that matters. Those are all non-issues for Putin, right? That's really important to understand, right? In the West, when tragedies happen in war, people are held accountable. The United States, Lieutenant Calley was held accountable for the My Lai massacre, right? Russia's notion here, right, not the Russian people, but Putin and his very small group, is that they are actually, right, defending, right, the great Russian intrinsic superiority, right, as a people and a race, and as the great Christian emergence, right, of authoritarian rule that rallies around, right, right, the charismatic Führer leader, right? So in essence, right, you know, this notion of a kind of biocosmic worldview, where there's a kind of biocosmic genetics, and there's a Führer, right? There's a powerful central leader who is Putin, who embodies the Volk, right, of the nation, right, is right at the very center, right, of what's happening here, right? And in order to get that, right, in order to get that, we need to actually understand, right, and let go of moral equivalence, right? Because actually, Putin's wrong, right? His critiques of the West are real, but the West is based on an entirely different notion, which is the democratization of governance, the intrinsic value of every single human being, right? The dignity of every person's story. That actually is the intrinsic value of the West. But what's happened, friends? And I want to track this for a second. The West itself has, in some real and fundamental sense, forgotten what it stands for. That's actually what's happening. What's happening is the reason that moral equivalences can be made, right, is because, right, Putin banked on the West having forgotten who it was. And not only forgotten, but forgotten that we've forgotten. And that's where Putin went wrong. You see, deep within the moral heart, right, of the human being are values. And there's a knowing that those values are intrinsic values, that they're real values. Now, the postmodern West has forgotten this, right? And that's a big deal. The postmodern West has forgotten that this is important at all, right? And Putin assumed that forgetting would mean that there wouldn't be any level of moral will that would actually cause the West to oppose him, right? And that's what hasn't happened, right? The great emergence here, the great, wonder here is that there's been this great arousal, right? This stunning coming together of the postmodern West, which has actually abandoned stories of value, abandoned first principles and first values, right? Adopted a kind of moral relativism, right? And began to view itself as a power player, right, on the world stage, and not as a holder of value, right? All of that was exploded in the last 2 weeks when the West actually remembered, the liberal West remembered for a moment that it stood for something. That's a big deal, right? And what reminds us that we stand for something more than anything else is heroism. Heroism. And what a hero says is, I stand for something larger than myself. And I'm willing to die for something larger than myself. Putin says in one of his talks before the war, he says, for Russians, even death is beautiful. And what he meant by that is that Russia has a sense of honor. Russia has a sense of nobility, right? Russia has a sense of heroism. Tragically, right, you can't have a sense of heroism and honor for a false set of gods, right? There's no question there was heroism and honor among Nazis, right, for sure, right? There was heroism and honor, right, in the most despotic armies in the world. And undoubtedly there will be, sacrifice of just complete tragic kind made by Russian troops. And Russian troops are all decent and good people at their core, and they're going to try and save their friends from being killed. And people might actually give up their lives for their friends or give up their lives for their mission. But that is a distorted sense of heroism. That's heroism which senses that there's something to die for, because if I don't have something to die for, I'm not really alive, but can't actually articulate what that is. So there's an intrinsic sense in the human being that I want to be a hero because I'm part of a larger field of value. But when that larger field of value is degraded, when it's corrupted, right, when it's expressing, right, a regressive, pre-modern, right, ethnocentric, homophobic, right, violation of human dignity, right, but it dresses it up, right, in the great story of kind of the mythic Russian Empire, right, that's when we get to massively tragic. Then we contrast that with heroism on the Ukrainian side, and heroism on the Ukrainian side is heroism for the sake of a democracy, for the sake of universal human rights, right, for the sake of all the values that the West holds dear. And so what Ukraine has done is reminded the West, you actually stand for something. You actually have an identity. There's actually not a moral equivalence, right, between Putin and China. And Putin and China are surprised now to see the West aroused. They're surprised because of their critique of the West to see that the West is actually reclaiming its own values. Now, it's a very small step that's happening. But in order to actually be able to respond in some real way, right, to this, to not just Ukraine right now, but to the entire structure of the world stage, right, to nuclear dictators, right, having the possibility to invade sovereign nations when the world has to stand back. What we need to do is we need to not just reclaim value in a moment where we see it violated, where it's obvious to us, right? That's what happened in the United States when George Floyd was killed, right? We saw this terrible violation of value, and that aroused political will. Whenever we see a violation of value, political will is aroused, right? So just like it happened in the George Floyd story, which kind of energized, right, the entire Black Lives Matter movement, right? We're now seeing on the international stage, right, the same kind of obvious violation of value, which is reminding the West of its own identity. Despite Russell Brand, despite Glenn Greenwald, right, despite Jim Garrison, right, despite all the analysis of the Ron Paul Institute, right, there's an overwhelming sense we're actually standing for something. And the reason the West was able to cohere, and we've seen an unbelievable, unmatched in human history, instant coherence of the West, was not only because of political interests, not only because of, right, power plays, right, in realpolitik, but actually what allowed the West to cohere was being reminded by its violation, right, that it actually stands for a noble set of truths and a noble set of values. That's an unbelievably important first step. Okay? Stay with me for a second. So the writer that I was citing you, Putin, a whole number of cites from Putin, a few minutes ago. So the writer, and I want to honor him, so I won't mention his name. So the writer who puts these Putin quotes together, right, who writes on Medium, he says, this whole notion of the Russians having a cosmology and it being about biocosmic sources, biocosmic forces, and the Russians embodying a higher, superior biocosmic force, he says as follows, the writer, he says, that may be weird to us. We, the West, don't really have a cosmology. Or if we do, it's pretty simple. We don't think about it much. You don't think about a cosmology a lot if your society works because you're not preoccupied with existential questions of what your rightful place in the universe is. Then he just goes on. So what the writer does is basically dismiss the need for a cosmology, meaning for a universe story, to dismiss the need for actually a story of value. That's wrong. In other words, it's not enough to be aroused for a moment. The reason Putin and China attacked is because they think that the West has lost its soul. And that's in part correct. We have lost our way. We have become dissociated from first principles and first values. We have forgotten what our universe story was, right? We failed, after all the postmodern deconstructions of value, we failed to reconstruct a shared universal grammar of value, which is the only thing that can respond to Putin, as we'll see in a second. However, Putin and China, in the end, misevaluated, thought that actually the West had completely forgotten. And in fact, when the West witnesses an overt and clear violation of value, right, the West is outraged. And when the West saw what was happening in Ukraine, not only, right, what created the coherence worldwide wasn't only a set of real political issues, realpolitik, but it was a shared sense of outrage against the violation of value that generated a new coherence and a new political will that allowed the organization of sanctions and a level of sanctions, right, and a level of confronting Russia short of military involvement, right, which has actually never been witnessed in world history before, right? So what cohered the West value? Now, take it another step with me. So what do we need to do now? So clearly we need to do everything we can to support Ukraine. Yeah, that's for sure. But it's not enough. It's not enough. You see, one of the things that China and Russia are saying is that we're living today in what they're calling a unipolar world. And a unipolar world essentially means a world in which one country, the United States, is dominant. The United States, as I'm sure many of you know, right, is responsible for most of NATO's budget. So Russia and China are saying this is a unipolar world and it can't go on this way. This is an issue of power. We need to challenge the power of the United States. We need to challenge United States' hegemony over currency. We need to challenge the 850 United States bases around the world. And we need to create a multipolar world where there's not one, but multi sources of power. That's actually not unreasonable. If you ignore value, is the issue can't be Russia and China against the United States. That's old language. That's an old conversation, right? That's the old pre-modern imperialist power game, which Russia wants to use as the interpretive frame for the world. That can't be our frame. It's got to have nothing to do with whether I'm Russian, or whether I'm Chinese, or whether I'm American, or whether I'm Canadian, or whether I'm French. It has to do with only one thing: the content of our character and not the color of our skin. And it's got to do with what are our shared values. And if we don't have a set of shared values, if we don't have first principles and first values rooted in the story of value, then we can't come together and create a world that is ultimately beyond the power politics of nation states. The United States is built on a set of values, but France is built on a set of values. The West is built on a set of values. Those values are anathema, right, to an authoritarian, right, brutal, right, devaluing of human life at its core, devaluing, right, of the individual human being at its core, devaluing of the unique story of every human being at its core, right? Those stories, right, are completely devalued by a kind of mythic, essentially nationalist, racist, horrific Putin, Hitler, Stalin, Mao-like value structures. This battle, it is a battle for the future soul of the world, but it's not a battle against Chinese, and it's not a battle against the Russians or the Brazilians or right, parts of Turkey that are playing in this, right? It's a battle which has nothing to do with nations. It's a battle of, are there intrinsic values that we stand for or aren't they? Right? Is there a universal grammar of value or isn't there? Now, stay with me for a second. What could actually happen in a moment which would actually allow, right, Putin to be stopped? So NATO and the United States can't do it. Because if NATO and the United States do it, what will happen? Putin will respond, this is realpolitik. This is power politics, and he may go even tactical nuclear because he feels humiliated and degraded on the world stage. Right? And because, right, he's imbibed in his very being this pre-modern ethnocentric, false mythic sense, right, of the Volk, right, if we can use that word, of Russia, right, and his responsibility to the motherland, right, which is the most dangerous thing in the world. That's not the same as patriotism. Patriotism is not I stand for the United States or I stand for France. Patriotism has to be patriotism for a universal grammar of value. I stand for value. I stand for value. I stand for a universal grammar of value. So what could politically happen, right, it's not going to happen this week and next week, but what needs to happen in order to be able to stop the Putins? It can't be a unipolar United States NATO move. There actually has to be, and the United Nations has been too weak to do this. The United Nations has been rife with corruption in 1,000 ways, but the vision of the United Nations is right? There has to be a multinational force, right, which is comprised of representatives of all the nations of the world, that's not run by a kind of Security Council in which you have places which, like the Soviet Union, that can veto any action, that actually acts as an expression, right, of the moral will of the world. And then that force, not the United States as a unipolar force, that force could actually morally, right, confront Putin and say the world says no. Not the United States, the world says no. That's absolutely necessary because that is something that the disinformation to the Russian people, right, is much harder, right, much harder to ignore. And that's something that Putin can't ignore. Putin, right, and China, right, need to be, right, confronted with a united world, and then ultimately Russia and China need to be part of that united world. Like the greatness of Russia, Tchaikovsky, Dostoevsky, right, Tolstoy, right? I mean, the list goes on and on, right? The genius of Russia and the genius of China, right, need to be integrated We need to go to the depth of Chinese history and Chinese philosophy and Chinese thought, not just the way China's doing it now with a kind of, a kind of caricatured appeal to Confucianism, which is purely a ploy, right? That's what's going on in China now for the last 20 years, but actually a genuine move to the depth of Taoism, the depth of Confucianism, the depth of Russian literature, the depth of Russian pathos, right? The depth of Brothers Karamazov, right? We need to actually bring China and Russia into a universal grammar of value. And that universal grammar of value is only going to happen if we actually, and here's the key, and now we're getting to the key of today, if we actually reclaim first values and first principles. And this is where it gets to be a big deal. And this is where we have to kind of, friends, take our stand in a very, very, very big way. And I apologize if I'm rambling a little bit today, and I'm trying to kind of articulate with my fever some coherent thoughts, but we're now getting to the core of it. So the key leadership in the West now has been reminded of value, because like in the George Floyd story, they've seen value violated. But then once the story's over, right, then we go back to our world in which there is no intrinsic value. And I want to get this straight. So Yuval Harari, my friend, writes in the Guardian, 5 days ago. So Harari writes, right, in the Guardian, and I want you to actually hear the words, because this is exactly where we need to go, and this gets to the core of the whole thing. So he writes in this article in the Guardian, just a few days ago, right? He writes very beautifully. That Putin's already lost the war because, right? The article is called "Why Vladimir Putin's Already Lost This War," and he writes, right? This is the Ukrainians and their heroism and their standing up, right, have already made Putin lose the war because the Ukrainians are creating a new set of stories, right? And he writes as follows, I'm going to read it to you. He says, nations are ultimately built on stories. Each passing day adds more stories that Ukrainians will tell, not only in the dark days ahead, but in the decades and generations to come. The president who refused to flee the capital, telling the US that he needs ammunition, not a ride. The soldiers from Snake Island who told a Russian warship to go fuck yourself and were killed. The civilians who tried to stop Russian tanks by sitting in their path. This is the stuff nations are built from. In the long run, these stories count for more than tanks. Now stay close. Yuval's right about that. However, and this is the key, Yuval's entire point, and Yuval's a parrot, I'm sure a super nice man, not a personal, but he's a parrot intellectually of the postmodern deconstruction of story and deconstruction of value. So Yuval, who writes here, nations are built on stories, says throughout his work, right, which has been adopted, right, as one of the kind of key intelligentsia works of the last, 15 years, in which, Barack Obama loves it and Bill Gates loves it and Jeff Bezos loves it. What Yuval says is all stories are made up. All stories are fictions. All stories are mere figments of our imagination. Look at Sapiens chapter 2 or Homo Deus chapter 7, right? This is all made up. And actually, the difference, therefore, if it's all made up, and he says, and actually Sapiens said the difference between Libya's Gaddafi and its violation of human rights, right, and human rights itself is a fictional, made up social construction story, right? We've invented value, right? We invented gods. Right? The whole thing, right, is made up. Wow. Does everyone get that? So actually, what Harari is saying is, he's saying, wow, isn't it great that Ukraine's creating these great stories? But what he's actually refusing to recognize is that actually he believes in his heart and soul that actually the values the West are standing for are intrinsic, better values. But he won't say it. Not only will he not say it, he says the opposite. All stories are made up. All stories are figments of imagination. And all stories are, literally the words he used, fictions. And he uses it in the context of comparing Libya's Gaddafi to the West. Gaddafi is Putin. So on the one hand, right, he's writing in The Guardian, right, oh my God, isn't this beautiful, right? Ukraine is standing, new stories are being created. On the other hand, he thinks we're idiots. Right? Because actually what he's written his entire life is that stories are completely made up. So what's the difference between Putin's story and the West story? According to Yuval Harari, nothing. According to Russell Brand, nothing. No intrinsic, right, distinction between values. It's not, Russell Brand says, goodies and baddies. It's just baddies and baddies, because there's no intrinsic distinction between values, because there's a complete denial of first values and first principles. Wow. Wow. Yuval Harari says in the article, the week before in The Guardian, he says, this is the moment where human choice is going to make the difference. Either we're going to repeat history or this new structure of human choice. Humans can make new choices. But actually, he's lying again, because Yuval Homo Deus, right, text after text after text, I'll just read you a couple of them, says humans have no capacity to actually make choices, and free will is a crock. There's no such thing as free will. It does not exist. So actually, there's no such thing as human choice whatsoever. Let me just read it to you, just so you don't think I'm making it up, right? You'll read chapter 8 in Homo Deus. It's called The Time Bomb in the Laboratory. And the time bomb, right, according to Yuval, is the realization that free will and choice is a crock. He says, right, and let me just to read you a couple of quotes. The contradiction between free will and contemporary science is the elephant in the laboratory. But that's actually not true. That's a distorted, wildly distorted and dogmatic reading of science, right? Which I don't have time to destroy now, but it deserves destroying. It's completely inaccurate, right? And just to get, he says decisions, there's no room for free will. Decisions are reached through a chain reaction of biochemical events, each determined by a previous event. Free will exists only in the imaginary stories. Now we're back to stories. Free will exists only in imaginary stories we humans have invented. Right? The last nail in freedom's coffin. Right? Like, oh my God. Right? So he does, I could go on, but there's essentially 50 paragraphs which destroy the notion of human choice. So just track with me here. So you've got basically Jim Garrison, you've got Yuval Harari, you've got Russell Brand, you've got Glenn Greenwald, right? Writer after writer. And what are they saying, right? Wow, this is a moment, right? In other words, right? They're saying, one, moral relativism, both sides, baddies and baddies. But Harari's not saying that. Harari's saying, no, actually we can choose. Actually, we can tell stories, but Harari says stories aren't real. And actually choice is not real. So what does that mean? And I want you to get this, friends, really, really deeply. What it means is that in the essential structure of things, there's no difference between Harari's position and Putin's. It's a very big thing to say. Now, meaning Harari's values, right, which he thinks are made up, happen to be much better. But Harari himself says that those values are made up, right? Now, in a unique situation where there's George Floyd being killed, right, in the streets of the United States, we're going to arouse political will because we're going to see values being violated. When we see the tragic pictures from the Ukraine and the incredible, gorgeous heroism of the Ukrainian people who we should take in refugees, we should send money, we should send planes in any way we can, we should arm them in any way we can, we should support Ukraine in every way. When we see the obvious violation of value, we remember for a moment who we are, we remember our values, and then we forget again. What we actually have to do is we need to create, right, not a unipolar American hegemony. We need to create a values hegemony in which there's a universal grammar of value, which is a context for our diversity. And we want Russia to join the community of nations. We want Russian greatness and Russian heroism and Russian pathos and Russian depth. And we want the Chinese to join the community of nations. But as long as, and here's the deal, as long as we don't embrace value and stand for value, and stand for the eros of value, and stand for the inherent beautiful story of value, and as long as we don't sacrifice for value, right, and as long as we don't live right within the context of a value that demands, right, our best and our honor and our transformation, and Russia and China look at the West as depraved, right, and corrupt, right, because all stories of honor and all stories of obligation and all stories of larger mythic beauty have been collapsed, and the West becomes, right, a rivalrous conflict, win-lose metrics power game. Well, then Russia and China will respond with their power game, right? And China's doing well, right? And it's going to be a pure power battle for the 20th century, right? 21st century, which we can either win or lose. It's going to be all about power, right? And we will slowly become, right, through various means, we'll create our own authoritarian technocracies, right, of their own devastating kind. The only way to respond to Russia and China and to respond to the creeping technocracies, to the creeping collapse of values, right, that we actually hear, and by the way, it's one of the things Putin points to. He points to this creeping technocracy run by the liberal elites, right, of the West, which are purely concerned for profit and have no values and no honor. Right? Putin points that out. He actually sees it. But his response is with a mythic, racist, vision of a new Russian Reich, right? Right? China's response is world domination, right, by China, right, through a very careful Belt and Road Initiative. The only way we're going to be able to respond to any of that is we reclaim story, right? And we reclaim story as an intrinsic value of Kosmos. And story means the universe is going somewhere, and it's going towards more and more value, more and more love. And love is real, and love is a real value, right? And value evolves. And some values are 1,000 times better than other values, right? That's a big deal, right? And we're actually, our value is not ethnocentric, homophobic, mythic Russia. Our value is goodness, truth, and beauty. And those things mean something. So when the West starts to stand for value, when we're energized by value, now, what do we need to do in order to do that? We need to actually articulate very clearly, right, in the best way we can, and put all of our passion, money, time, and energy into articulating at a level of Kant. It's like a Kantian revolution. What is the universal grammar of value? That can bring together United Nations beyond power, right? Beyond power politics, beyond realpolitik. If we don't do that, right, it's over, right? The entire future depends on our capacity, right, to articulate, right, a universal grammar of value rooted in a story of value, which is real and intrinsic and inherent, right, and arouses our political will, right, in a serious and powerful way. That's the whole story. That's the whole thing. That's everything. Can you feel that? Can you feel that, everybody? Right, that's right. And I apologize if I was, a little fevered out and a little inelegant, but you got that? This is what we need to do, right? In other words, last couple of sentences. Putin's critiques of the West are in large measure correct, but his response is a mythic evil, right? What Putin's done is he's reminded the West that it stands for value. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's critical. We've been able to create the fastest political, geopolitical, realpolitik coherence in the history of the world in 2 weeks because we were rallied to the outrage against the violation of value. That's huge. Now what we have to do is embrace value as real. Okay? And value as real means evolving value, that we participate in its evolution, but it's also intrinsic to Kosmos. It evolves from the intrinsic nature of what Kosmos is. That's a big deal. And here's the thing, my friends. In his deepest heart of hearts, Putin knows this also. So does Xi in China, right? It's not true that Putin is heartless. He's not, right? He's cruel. He's vicious. He's willing to cause untold death and destruction, right? And ripping bodies apart, quite literally, of men, women, and children in order to accomplish, right, his vogue, pure, noble Russia desecration of value. But inside his heart, just look at the guy. He knows the value is real. But no one's ever been able to break through in the West and meet Putin and articulate together with him a shared story of value. That's the thing. Whose job is it to actually turn to Putin, right, and take him out of Dugin's thinking and take him out of the thinking of the kind of far right Christian, xenophobic, Christian, not in the best sense of Christian, in the tragic sense of Christian, right? A kind of far-right Christian nationalist, racial superiority, right? Biocosmic Russians, right? No. Who's going to take him out of that, right? Putin's crazy smart, but actually he's never found, right, an articulation of a noble grammar of value in which he can participate, because we haven't articulated it, right? Right? We live nobly. The Ukrainians are reminding us that we're noble. Wow. We owe them everything. We have to give them everything. But here's the thing. Putin wants to be noble also. In this lifetime, he's probably not going to get there. And probably the moral obligation of this moment is to remove Putin from power in every way possible. But there's many more Putins coming. And we have to meet them with a noble vision of inherent evolving value. And our commitment here together at the Center for Integral Wisdom is to lay everything on the line. Everything. Not to have a lot of, clicks, not to participate, in all the public debates, right? We actually want to keep our nose to the grindstone until we've got it and we're close now. We're trying to work through every issue philosophically, morally, psychologically, existentially, politically, to be able to articulate literally this new universal grammar of value and to share it with the world. That would create a real United Nations, right? Not torn apart, right, through all of the fractures of realpolitik, but a real United Nations that rallies around a shared vision of value. And when that shared vision of value is strong and it's powerful, right, and it's well worked out, and it's easily explainable to anyone, and yet profoundly deep, right, in the Dostoevsky sense, right, then it's going to be the strange attractor that actually brings the entire Chinese people and all the Russian people and all the people in the United States and all the people in France and all the people in all the parts of Eurasia and Africa and South America, right? Value is attractive. Value is alluring, right? Value coheres us. We desperately need, as a world, a new coherence, right? We cannot be in a situation where we have to watch Zelensky, God forbid, may he live till 120, potentially die. We have to not be able to intervene, because if we intervene, it's going to be NATO, United States against Russia, or Russia, China, and that will activate, right, nuclear. We need a voice of clarity in the world, which is not unipolar United States, but we move into actually a new world order, right, based on universal grammar of value. That's where history is going. That's where history must go. And if there's anything that COVID, together with Ukraine, have taught us, they've taught us is it's not too big to fail, right? And value and story are at the center. And it's not local, but it's got to be a universal grammar of value. The good, the true, and the beautiful. Love is real. All of us together. Oh my God.